All right, welcome back to our Unit 1 Religions lecture. We're going to go over now the other religions. So we talked about the three Abrahamic or monotheistic religions in the last video, but now we're going to talk about our polytheistic and religion with no God. So let's talk about Hinduism and Buddhism real quick. So for Hinduism came from the Aryans, the group of Aryans which lived in the Caucasus Mountains, right near India. They are pretty much here in Nepal, Pakistan, at the top of India. That is where they're located, in that little region. How I always remember India, it kind of looks like a bear, and there's a dinosaur right beside it, which is Pakistan. And then China's the chicken right here, right above. But the Aryans, they come from the Hindu Kush Mountains of India. And they're going to come in and they're going to take over India for themselves. As they take over India for themselves, they are going to think of ways to maybe control the population. The people are kind of antsy. They're not liking the new rulers. So they're deciding to establish a religion that is going to keep people invested and involved and obedient. So what they come up with is Hinduism. Hinduism today is pretty much only in this little region here. It's entirely in India. There's a bit in Nepal and a few in Pakistan. This was all one country when the British had it up till 1948. So it is going to be just what's left of the greater Indian subcontinent. Hinduism is not popular. It does not spread, and we'll talk about the reasons why. So with Hinduism, it is polytheistic. We talked about mono and polytheism in the last video. Monotheism is one god. Polytheism is multi-gods. For the Hindus, they have gods for everything. They literally have hundreds of gods. And for them, they say that is many forms of one god. So they say all of those are bits and pieces to one god in general. And the main god is Vishnu or Shiva, which is the goddess of India or the Hindus. Things they believe in is reincarnation. So if you look at that root word, re is just like the word redo, to do something again. Incarnate is to be birthed or to be born. Reincarnation is rebirth, and it's based upon your karma. And karma is that of, if I do good things happen to me. If I do bad things happen to me. So for a Hindu, life is all about a cycle, and you're going to keep coming back, and you're going to come back as different things. It's kind of like animalism. You can come back as different things depending on how you were. To live a good life as an Indian Hindu, to come back, you would be a cow. A cow is seen as the perfect creature and to be the perfect form of Hinduism. So if you go to India to their McDonald's, you cannot order beef. They have no beef on their menus. It's all chicken or vegetable options. It's seen as wrong to eat cows and beef. When 9/11 happened to the United States, a small tribe in India actually sent us like 36 cows as an apology. And of course, those cows haven't been eaten because that would be very disrespectful. So we still have those cows and their descendants in the United States today. So you do not eat cows. It's very disrespectful, and that is seen as living the perfect life. If you live a bad life, though, you might come back as something like a pig or an ant or a tree. There is anything. You can come back as anything. There's no limit to what you can do. For them, you really can't escape that cycle of reincarnation. If you live that perfect life as a human, you're going to come back and you're going to be that cow, and then you're going to keep coming back as a cow. One of the worst levels of reincarnation is coming back as a human. They do not want to be humans because humans suffer. The universal suffering of the human is what they practice and study against. They want to avoid being human. They do not like the suffering and the struggles of being a human, and that is where sin comes from, is being human, right? Animals don't sin. So all of your actions have consequence, okay? If I'm bad in this life, I'm not going to come back as something good. I'm going to be a person again, and I don't want to be a person. I want to be a cow, or I want to be something like a tree or a cow. So that is the Hindu point of view. Going back to the Aryans and how they held people with this religion is the caste system. So the caste system is very rigid. It's a hierarchy system in which where you're born is where you're going to be for the rest of your life. Let's look at the caste system real quick. If we pull it up real quick, on Google. One second. If we go to images, let's look at that caste system. So where you're born is where you're going to be in life. There is no escaping where you're born. You can't move up. You can't move down. You'll see this as a 4 or 5, and sometimes you'll see this bottom untouchable. We'll talk about that. The Brahmin are seen as priests or academics, nobility. Those at the top that know about Hinduism. Those that are experts and can guide you to achieving happiness and to that next level of nirvana. So the next group is going to be consisting of nobles like warriors and kings. They're equivalent to knights of Europe and nobles, dukes. The next level is going to be your middle class, like your merchants, your landowners, your business owners. The next group will be your commoners, your peasants, servants, and then at the bottom, your out of caste group is going to be your outcast or untouchables. So if you're born from that Brahmin class, if your father was a Brahmin, your grandfather was a Brahmin, his grandfather was a Brahmin, his grandfather was a Brahmin, there is no escaping that caste. If you're born a fisherman, that means your dad was a fisherman. Your mom was a fisherman. You have to stay in the same class. In India, a lot of the times you don't get to choose your wife or husband. That is done by your family, and that is to keep you in this same level. It is seen as very wrong to leave this level, and you're not allowed to do that. Of course, a Brahmin's not going to be with an untouchable. If you're born an untouchable, you have to marry an untouchable. You are not seen as, there's no hereditary movement. Let's say you're very smart, you are very good at your job. You can't move to that next level. Even those that could win a lottery or something like that, if you're a commoner, you're always going to be with that group. You have to live with this group of people. You have to trade and interact with this group of people. There is no mobility whatsoever. Where you're born is where you're going to be till you die, and your kids are also going to have the same fate. Okay? You can't move. And this is why a lot of people in India today are moving to atheism, because they don't like this system. The system has been banned since the 1950s, but it's still used. If you go into a job as a commoner, like a middle class job, they're not going to give you that job. They might at least give you the interview, but they're never going to give you this job. So informally, it still exists today, and this is how the Aryans kept the Indian population intact. This is why also Hinduism is not popular. It does not travel. You think this is influential? Do you think people would voluntarily take this religion? And it's absolutely not. A lot of our doctors in Buchanan County, they move to atheism when they leave because they do not like the system. They might have been in the commoner class, but they were smart enough to be up here in the upper class of doctors, and they never could move up because simply a system of a segregation. You have to live in a certain place. You have to act in a certain place. And that caste system is a big problem for the culture of India. It's created several issues. For a map, if you look, Hinduism's pretty much primarily India. Pakistan has a few Hindus that have just been there before the borders of Pakistan and India were changed. This used to all be called Greater India or British India. Nepal has a few, but for the most part, India. Looks like a little bear sitting on a ledge there. That is that group, and it is in Asia. The guy that is going to try to spread it is very unsuccessful, and you can see why. It doesn't work. So let's finally talk about Buddhism. Buddhism, unlike the mono or polytheistic religions, really doesn't have a god. Your founder is going to be Siddhartha Gautama, and he is going to be known as the Buddha. You'll see statues if you go to stores or look at places like China or Japan. You'll see statues of Buddhism or Buddha. And Buddha, you might think, is seen as the god because he's always depicted in gold. He looks very happy. He's like represents happiness and wealth and inner peace. He's not a god to them. He is just a guy that achieved nirvana. Okay, so they say that in Buddhism, the world is suffering. So let's look at the Four Noble Truths real quick. We have Four Noble Truths to Buddhism. It's pretty simple, okay? Here's a good one. So he said, there is a truth to suffering. The truth of the cause of suffering will go to the truth of the end of suffering. How do we get rid of suffering? And then fourth and finally, the truth of the path to the end of suffering. So if you look at it here too, how do we get to suffering? What are the causes? How do we get rid of or end or mitigate suffering? And how do we avoid suffering? So to achieve nirvana for a Buddhist is to get away from suffering. If you look at Buddhism, you also have the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths are the world is nothing but suffering. And how do we get away from it? They say the Eightfold Path is how we move forward. So you need first and foremost the right view. You have to know the truth. You have to know and understand and look for the truth. And that is how you reach nirvana. You have to have the right intention. You have to have a free mind without evil. You have to have the right speech. You have to be very calm in your speech. You have to say nothing that hurts no one else. You don't gossip. Right action. You work for the good of others, the right livelihood. You respect and enjoy life and nature. You have the right effort, so you resist evil and temptation. You have the right concentration, so you can practice meditation. And then right mindfulness. You can control your thoughts and try to avoid temptation, lust, things like that. So if you can do these and perfect all of these 8 paths, then you will achieve nirvana. And to a Buddhist, there is no heaven, there is no hell. In their point of view, heaven is not existing. To achieve nirvana, you no longer exist. You're off this wheel. So Buddhism is represented by a wheel. You're constantly on a wheel. What does a wheel do on a car? It keeps going. It keeps spinning. So for them, you start life, you're at this point in the wheel. You're a child, then you're a middle-aged adult, then you're an old man, then you're born again. So they say, how do I get off this wheel or this circle? And if you do these 8 things, you no longer exist. You achieve nirvana. You are inner peace. So for them, heaven is not existing. To get off that wheel. To avoid suffering, to exist is to suffer. To avoid that suffering is to not exist at all. For Hinduism, or Buddhism, my apologies, on a map, it starts, Siddhartha Gautama is in India. He's not a big fan of Buddhism, founds this religion and this moral obligation. It's going to spread into China, which looks like the chicken. It's going to spread into, you see here, we have North and South Korea, which is kind of the beak of the chicken, and it's going to be popular in Japan. It'll also take part a little bit, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, that little region there. But for the most part, it is a Southern Asian religion. And it works very well for the Chinese and the Japanese. When we talk later, China and Japan really don't like Christianity because their emperors are seen as gods. And when we teach a religion that there's only one God, they're not going to appreciate that. So they're going to torture and kill Christians or anyone that tries to spread the faith. So that's very important. It's a religion that works with them. Also for Japan, they use Shintoism, which is worship of their ancestors. You can be a Buddhist and you can also worship your ancestors. So Buddhism is one of those religions that you can tie into another religion. It doesn't have a god, so it doesn't step on any toes, and it's just being peaceful, having a good moral philosophy. As long as you don't worship, you could pretty much tie it into any other religion, and it's not a problem. You will never see a Buddhist being a problem or being violent or having trouble with any other religion. What religions that we've talked about would have problems with each other? Over here in Israel, we have Jews and Muslims for Palestine. Christians and Jews get along pretty well. Christians and Muslims is a little bit iffy. It depends on the circumstance. The United States is always in the Middle East. We're having conflicts. Muslims and Hindus in Pakistan and India really hate each other. They don't get along. Of course, Muslims believe in monotheism, so they don't like the ideas of Hinduism whatsoever. And Buddhists, they're just peacefully over here, and they can have multiple religions. They don't cause any trouble. So let's look at some symbols of each religion. For Christianity, you guys should know, if you look at someone, how do you tell they're a Christian? They might have a cross necklace. They might have a cross tattoo. Usually they'll have something that depicts a cross on them. That is what Jesus was crucified on during Easter, the most holy holiday of Christianity. Going to Islam, we're going to have the crescent moon. For them, the crescent moon, they were big into studying astronomy, into the sciences, and it always has a star. If you look at Muslim countries today, almost all of their flags will have a crescent moon. Let's look at some of them. Let's look at some Muslim country flags for some examples here. So here's a lot of Muslim countries. Here's one with a flag with the crescent moon. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 right there out of that group that I see. 7. There's quite a few. There's no limitation. For Jews, the logo of the Jew, if you meet a Jew, they might have this on a necklace, and that is the Star of David. That's not a pentagram. It's 6-pointed star. It's 2 triangles within each other. During the Holocaust, of course, Jews had to wear this, but they will wear this on a necklace. If you meet a Muslim, they might wear the crescent and star on a necklace. For Buddhists, we just talked about the wheel. They want to get off that wheel. How do you get away from that wheel? How do you get off the circle or the continued path of life? And for Hindus, it's the most interesting. It is just this symbol here, and I'm not entirely sure what it means, but it is in Hindu. It's something to do with reincarnation. But those are our 5 religions. Those are our 5 core fundamental beliefs and ideas. People agree on these things in these religions. They're undisputed. Of course, there's 300 different flavors of Christianity. If you go to one church, drive up 5 minutes up the road, it's going to be a completely different church. The same can be said for Islam. There's about 3 different big groups of Muslims. For Jews, it depends if they're a Middle Eastern Jew or an American Jew or a European Jew. They have different groups too. Hindus, they pretty much are uniform because they're all located in one densely populated country, and Buddhists pretty much have a similar ideology of finding that inner peace. So as we move forward to Unit 2, we'll talk about the Renaissance and how religion plays a key role in these things.